Hello, and welcome to day 2 of the 5th annual Oxford Economics of Mutuality Forum. My name is Amanda Catherine Roman, and I'll be serving as your Master of Ceremonies. Yesterday, we heard the clarion call for a more collaborative, inclusive, and holistic way of doing business. We learned that there are, in fact, hundreds of movements and thousands of leaders around the world dedicated to supporting the transition of business to a place where it not only recognizes but actually creates value for each and every stakeholder it touches, including our planet and our communities. Today, we will dive deeper into one of the key components that is necessary to accelerate and facilitate this transition by taking a look at the measurement challenge and how to redefine performance, accounting, and investment. Thank you for being here with us today and for your contributions that you will make to the conversations and the collaborations as we move forward together to catalyze systemic change. It is now my honor to introduce Colin Mayer and Bruno Roche, co-hosts of the forum.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed. Welcome to this second session of the Responsible Business Forum. Yesterday, we explored the problems that arise in relation to the existing economic system and way of running companies according to shareholder principles. And we set out the initial ideas of an alternative approach based on company purpose and purposes that are associated in particular with the notion of solving problems of people and planet in a commercial, profitable way, and not profiting from producing problems. Now, that's a really important notion of thinking about the purpose of business as comprising meaningful challenges. And we want to explore that in more detail and examine how the alternative approach of solving problems profitably should be implemented. In Oxford, over the last few months, we've been devising a framework that is closely related to the economics of mutuality that is designed to do exactly that. We call it the SCORE framework, which is an acronym for S, simplify, C, connect, O, own, R, reward, and E, exemplify. So the S suggests that an important element is to simplify what we mean by the purpose of a company. I described yesterday how the purposeful approach should not be vague or woolly. On the contrary, it's precise about what problems a company is solving, for whom, how it's solving them, when, and why it's well suited to solving those problems. Simplify, therefore, calls for clarity about the formulation of the company's purpose so that everyone can engage and connect with it. And that is what the C stands for, connect. The company purpose should be connected with everyone in the organization and those outside the company who are relevant to its delivery. The economics of mutuality emphasizes exactly this, the importance of a company's ecosystem and working with partner organizations, including NGOs, civil society, government, as well as other businesses, to solve problems in the ecosystem. And that should be reflected in a sense of ownership, which is the O. People in the organization should feel a sense of ownership of their part of the purpose and take responsibility for its successful fulfillment. That should be true for everyone, from the board down to the shop floor. But it should also be true, obviously, for the owners themselves. The purpose should also be reflected in the reward system, the R, and that is where the subject of today's focus comes in, namely measuring performance. A company should determine the metrics against which it should evaluate and report its performance. As the economics of mutuality emphasizes, this is related to human assets, social assets, and natural assets, as well as financial and material ones. But what this also suggests is that measurement is a vital management as well as reporting tool for incentivizing people in the organization. Finally, the E relates to exemplify, which is about bringing the corporate purpose to life through narratives, examples, case studies, visual imagery, as well as words. It should demonstrate the authentic adoption of the purpose through recognizing and reporting failures, as well as celebrating successes. A compelling purpose can give everyone associated with a company a real sense of meaning and fulfillment, pride and dignity of what they are doing if it can be connected to everyone inside and outside the organization in a meaningful and imaginative way. Now, I just want to briefly illustrate this SCORE framework in relation to one example, and it's of the Dutch pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk, which produces insulin. A few years ago, it thought its purpose was to produce insulin. Well, that's not a very inspiring purpose. It's more of a mission statement of what Novo Nordisk does, simply to produce insulin. And then it thought further about its purpose, and it recognized it was actually to help people treat type 2 diabetes. So it worked with doctors, hospitals, universities around the world to identify the best ways of treating type 2 diabetes. And then it recognized, well, actually, its purpose was a bit more than that. It was to help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes at all. So it started working with governments, with local authorities, with health workers to identify the ways in which people should change their lifestyle to avoid getting type 2 diabetes in different parts of the world. And its purpose is now essentially to eradicate or to defeat diabetes. Now that illustrates extremely well exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the SCORE framework. So the simplifying of the purpose, the clarity of going from saying it's about producing insulin to recognizing that it's about eradicating or defeating type 2 diabetes brings real clarity to the notion of its purpose. It's connected in terms of delivering that with hospitals, doctors, universities, governments, local authorities, health workers around the world so that it could fulfill its purpose. It owns it. The ownership of Novo Nordisk is that it's listed and traded on the New York and the Danish stock markets, but it also has one dominant owner, the Novo Nordisk Foundation. And that foundation owns the largest block of shares in Novo Nordisk and is able to ensure that the company really fulfills its purpose. It measures its performance. It measures its performance in terms of an extensive program of measurement of the cost of diabetes, medication adherence, and obesity management. And it targets non-financial performances as well as financial performance in terms of determining the remuneration schemes within the company. Finally, the company has a very effective communication of its purpose through this notion and narrative of defeating diabetes and a program that it calls Cities Changing Diabetes. So I think it illustrates extremely well how in practice a company can implement and enact its corporate purpose in a very effective way using essentially this SCORE framework. Now I'm going to turn to Bruno Roche to say more about the focus of today's discussion on that one element of measurement of performance.
Well, thank you very much, Colin. Thank you for this introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone. That's a privilege of being connected around the world. And essentially, the core of the argument that Colin has developed is that business performs better when, and it's true to its nature, when profit maximization is not its sole purpose. And then eventually when purpose is defined as being useful to the world. And in that paradigm, the performance comes from the investment that the company makes in its ecosystem and the return it would get from it. That's the new frontier of value creation. And like brands and marketing have become drivers and repository of value creation as from the 70s, especially in the consumer goods sector, and that companies actually had to invest huge amount of money to build this brand and this new capability, purpose-centric and ecosystem-based business model is the new paradigm for value creation. And our argument that companies failing to embrace its transformation are similar to the ones who did not embrace the marketing transformation in the consumer goods sector. they eventually decayed and disappeared. So the core of the issue here is how to bring this notion of purpose-led and ecosystem business model in reality, and to what extent this actually can become a source of value creation. And our argument is that purpose, performance measurement, profits, and incentive have to be aligned. If the purpose of business is to maximize profits, then financial accounting is perfectly aligned with it. But if the purpose of your business is what we describe here, which is to thrive and prosper by meeting the need of its ecosystem, then financial accounting is no longer appropriate. And actually, worse, it could create misalignment and unnecessary tension in the organization. Paul Polman yesterday reminded us that current accounting captures only 15% of the value created. So this actually is a sign of the size of the challenge. So the purpose of today is the focus on the future of performance measurement and the accounting system that support them. In an ideal world, we would like to start with defining performance, then developing the management accounting systems to monitor it, and finally, developing a form of reporting to talk about it. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. And because over the last 10, 15 years, business was primarily concerned to prove its good corporate citizenship and to mitigate risk, well, collectively, we started with reporting without developing the business model sustaining it. That's, in my view, the first problem. The second problem is that in the space of reporting, there are a myriad, thousands, a notion of initiatives that actually are unfortunately often inconsistent in their assessment and also quite confusing to interpret, frankly. So to cut through this jangle and to make sense of the confusion, our argument is that corporate performance measurement and accounting has to be reformed. That's what we are going to talk today. But first of all, I think we have to be clear about the objective of measurement and to what extent the measurement is serving the interest of the interested parties. Is it to make management decision? Is it to make investment decision? Is it to reward people, or is it to communicate? And in our view, measurement needs to serve at least 4 stakeholders. The first one is the board of directors of companies, because they formulate strategies, because they are there to allocate resources at the high level, and because they are also responsible to set up the reward mechanism. The second element, the second body, is the management, the leadership team, who make management decisions and implement projects. The third group of people are the investors, who make investment decisions and also monitor the investment. And finally, the policymakers who seek to align the corporate behavior with public interest. So in our view, in order to serve the purpose that drives value creation and also to serve the interest of different parties relevant to creating value through purpose-centric business models, we need 3 core components. The first one is a system of accounting for costs. The second one is the methods of valuation. And the third one is a form of reporting. And in that order. Unfortunately, we have much more initiatives on the form of reporting that we have on the first 2. But in our view, we need to bring this order back in track, because we need to define performance first, to then set up a method to evaluate the value created by the performance management, and then eventually to report and to communicate the rest of the world. And these 3 schools of thought, or the 3 methodologies, are mutually reinforcing. They are not mutually exclusive. They are mutually reinforcing, and each company would have to spend an equal amount of time and intention to each of these topics. Accounting for costs relies simply on non-financial measures to assess how an investment in building, maintaining, and replenishing social, human, and natural capital assets. It is a fairly simple and straightforward approach to use to leverage the language and the principle of accounting, but applied beyond the traditional boundaries of the firm and beyond financial capital. It's based on the idea that if you invest as a company in the social, human, natural capital, in the ecosystem in which you operate and from which you depend, you should expect a fair return. That's what we said at the beginning of our talk. That's the new frontier of value creation. The same way companies had to invest a huge amount of money in brands, in marketing, and they expected, and they did receive a huge return. The new frontier is to align the accounting principles and the management accounting practice to take into account these investments across different forms of capital and expect a return in terms of financial value creation. The second technique, which is called valuation techniques, use monetary multipliers, usually derived from historical estimators, to impute a financial value to the impact of non-financial outcome measures. It's a relatively recent school of thought that actually Clara Barbie and the IMP project are going to present in the next panel. And it is a fairly useful method for investors and also for policymakers to understand eventually the impact of business on a number of non-financial capital assets. The last family of initiatives is reporting, which essentially is using non-financial measures to create transparency about the progress and goals of companies in addressing environmental and social concerns. So we are going to spend the next few hours describing, talking about these issues, and also to understand actually that in order for companies to embrace this transformation of purpose-centric, ecosystem-based business model, the accounting system, both in terms of management accounts, valuation techniques, and reporting methodologies, have to work together in order to facilitate and support this transition from pure financial profit maximization to value creation for many. And now I'd like to hand over to my friend and colleague, Alistair Collins-Jones, who is going to drive us through the different movements that exist in that space. And also later on, we will have a fascinating panel, which actually will discuss these topics of finance, accounting, the future of measurement to support this transformation that we're describing today as part of this call, as part of this forum. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Yesterday, I briefly introduced a series of visual maps created for the forum, the goal of which was to create shared meaning behind the big systemic issues we often discuss and debate, but perhaps still lack clarity and consistency on when it comes to the many interrelated relationships and implications. Rather than through a lengthy report or a stale PowerPoint, we've developed interactive visual maps that maintain as much as possible the dynamic, complex nature of the issues we are discussing. Our coverage of the movements is, of course, not exhaustive, and with the support and feedback of others, we'll be continuing to develop both the content and functionality of the maps to make them as useful and comprehensive as possible. You can also view and explore all the maps on your own through following the link on the main forum event page, but I'll be taking you through one more of them today. As we have just heard from Colin and Bruno, engaging the finance and accounting community is one of the most important levers for changing our economic system, but it is also fraught with many complex challenges. The issue of how performance is measured and communicated cuts across sectors and stakeholders. It's not just how the firm measures performance and sets targets, it's how investors then understand and interpret their performance. It is how it is valued, reported, and analyzed by markets. It's how consumers form their perception of companies, for good or for ill. But it's also fundamentally a mindset. Performance shapes decision-making and behavior. Purely financial definitions of growth and success create goals and drive behavior consistent with what's being measured. So it is a truly systemic issue with many interconnected components. So who are the actors involved in seeking to change the status quo and transform this crucial aspect of our economic system? The Measurement and Reporting Group is composed of movements and organizations such as SASB, GRI, and IIRC that focus on the creation of standards and frameworks to help companies report on non-financial aspects of their performance, using a variety of self-reported and collected ESG data. All three respond to breakdowns in communication between different parties, which come from complexity, opacity, and gaps in non-financial information. SASB focuses specifically on creating a common language between businesses and investors around sustainability issues. The public also struggle to access easy-to-understand information about businesses and their practices to inform decisions about what they buy and where they invest. The many standards and logos become overwhelming. Problematically, non-financial reporting is substantially more difficult than financial reporting, not only because of the nature of what is being measured, but also because of the lack of generally accepted standards. This has resulted in the growth of a range of frameworks, standards, and measurement approaches that were designed for different audiences and purposes, but taken as a whole create a confusing collection of reporting and measurement tools. In response to the number of frameworks and measurement approaches, as well as the duplication of efforts, important consensus building is now underway on how to improve impact measurement, its coherence, and reliability. The Impact Management Project aims to build global consensus through its practitioner network and structured network. The Value Balancing Alliance also seeks to standardize how to assess the value of a company through using both impact statements and cost-based accounting approaches. This combines both the valuation and accounting components Bruno just talked us through. A final group, including Just Capital, uses ranking to encourage better corporate practice, often using self-reported business data. They generate recognition for businesses who top the rankings, aiming to create a race to the top and influence investors' capital allocation decisions. It's impossible to look at performance measurement without considering the influence of the Big Four assurance and accountancy companies. One of their roles is to provide reasonable assurance that businesses' financial statements give a true and fair representation of performance in accordance with reporting frameworks, and this is now being extended to assurance for sustainability reporting. In addition to these natural extensions to the audit and assurance services, KPMG, PwC, and EY each have developed discrete methodologies to evaluate the impact of a firm's activities. These initiatives represent a different contribution to the space in that they are designed specifically to inform better decision-making for managers, rather than focusing on investors and regulators as a reporting and valuation tool would. A common approach not unique to the Big Four is to turn non-financial impact into dollar valuations. This can be helpful in engaging other stakeholders on how non-financial impacts connect to financial performance, but it also raises legitimate questions about arbitrariness and non-commensurability. Does it make sense to give everything a financial value? Is it sensible, for example, to give a measurement of trust a dollar value, or are we simply maintaining the dominance of finance as a way of viewing all types of value? It also raises a broader question given the range of methodologies and approaches emerging from this space and the previous group alone. How many of them are really contributing to the necessary methods and clarity to drive the systems change we need in performance measurement? And that puts purpose at the very center of its thinking. Our final two groupings focus on investors and shareholders. Many of you will be familiar with the various categorizations of investing approaches that exist, often on a continuum with market rate returns and conventional investing at one end and loss of capital and philanthropy at the other. Here we place providers of philanthropic capital in a separate group, and we haven't considered ESG screen conventional investing. The majority of the movements and organizations we see on the map are nonprofit initiatives, which is why philanthropic groups and funds are important players here. They stand behind and channel funding into new ideas, networks, and institutions. Increasingly, foundations provide grant funding alongside venture philanthropy and other types of capital to advance their aims. They play a crucial role in the ecosystem by supporting the organizations advancing important work necessary for delivering systems change, but cannot promise the kind of financial returns required to raise capital. Our final group for today, Impact Investing and Responsible Finance, includes a cluster of impact investment communities such as Global Impact Investor Network, Global Steering Group for Impact Investment. These groups recognize a need for tools, resources, and networking in the area of the sector which remains small relative to mainstream investing. According to GSG, impact investing represents just 1% of capital allocated globally. The Principles for Responsible Investment offers a UN-backed set of voluntary and aspirational investment principles with possible actions to incorporate environmental, social, and corporate governance issues into investment practice. And like Responsible Investor, target investors who are closer to the mainstream. We also see a cluster of environmentally orientated actors. The investor agenda encourages investors to set science-based portfolio emission reduction targets, while Global Investor Coalition on Climate Change creates a platform for dialogue between investors and policymakers. The Green Finance Institute combines public and private finance into innovative financial products. So what can we take from all of this, and what are the questions that it raises? While a huge quantity of non-financial information now exists, transparency and comparability remain low. Much of the focus to date has been on the output side. That is to say, how performance is discussed, reported, and communicated to various stakeholders, rather than on the input side, which is where non-financial measurement systems tied to management accounts can be implemented in firms to impact executive decision-making and incentive structures, and ultimately drive more holistic performance, tackling the key breakdown of dominant financial metrics and its reinforcing feedback loop as depicted on this map. But given every company will have its own particular management system and decision-making process, often developed over many years of operations, what are the prospects of finding consensus on what these systems of management accounting ought to do? How should they work, and what data can be and should be collected to drive them? Especially as we have already seen the proliferation of methods and standards for non-financial reporting and valuation. The collaboration between business executives, investors, regulators, and policymakers, alongside of the voice of consumers, is essential in aligning approaches to reporting, valuation, and management accounting systems behind purpose. Secondly, the emergence of impact investing community over the last decade has been crucial in advancing and illustrating a viable alternative to maximizing return in the short term. GIN estimates the size of impact investing market today to be $502 billion compared to $46 billion in 2015. Unsurprisingly, there is similar progress in the growth of actors in the impact investing space. There are an ever-increasing number of research, advisory, membership, and event services, all serving the impact investing community. While this progress is at first glance good news, an important concern must be raised. To what extent has the time come for impact investors to begin to build more effective lines of communication and collaboration back into mainstream finance, rather than continuing to grow their own niche? Is there a more ambitious, even impactful agenda for this group of investors to connect back into mainstream finance and share their lessons and struggles with impact measurement and non-financial performance measurement? To galvanize the growing group of investors interested in using their capital to drive real change and returns on investment, not into a separate investment community, but to challenge the status quo in finance more broadly. In the process, they will exert more pressure and put more energy into shifting the key breakdowns that have been featured on this map, short-termism in the industry. I hope that this map has given you a quick but very brief tour, but fairly comprehensive tour of the various movements that are involved in shifting the status quo in the investment and finance space. We'll be able to enjoy a wonderful set of panelists that will be introduced by Amanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair, for that great visual and for giving us some very thought-provoking questions to ask ourselves. The integration of those non-financial metrics certainly will require a great deal of coordination. We are going to take a very brief pause for about 60 seconds to bring our panelists on the line, and they will be discussing how finance, accounting, and investment can be redefined to enact that systemic business transformation. We'll be back with you in a moment.
1.
I'm very happy to welcome you at our Finance, Investment and Measurement panel, and I would like to thank our distinguished panelists who will be sharing their thoughts in a few minutes. I am Nadia Terfous, the MD of EOM Solutions, which is the management consultancy of economics of mutuality and a former partner with McKinsey & Company. Our topic today is really at the center of the question of reshaping capitalism. It can help drive changes in the way financial capital gets allocated and non-financial capital gets remunerated. By non-financial capital, I mean human, social, natural. Before we actually dive deeper into the core of finance, investment, and measurement, I would like to welcome Boji. Boji is the Chief Representative for Europe and Assistant Dean at CKGSB, which is a renowned business school in China. He's also an entrepreneur, an expert of the Chinese market, and an international speaker intervening in top conferences and events. Boji, there seems to be quite some traction in China on the topic of responsible business. Just to give an example, the book by Bruno Rauch and Jay Jacob, Completing Capitalism, was actually translated and published in Chinese. So given your experience in Europe and China, could you tell us the difference you perceive between the two geographies in terms of resonance of responsible business, but also real changes in business practices that you've observed? And my second question would be, do you have some examples of companies that have led a significant transformation with a measurable impact? That's the topic of today in these geographies over the last 5 to 10 years. Thank you, Boji.
Well, thank you for this question, wonderful question. So our school had long been engaged in the social impact. Since about 2005, our school had been mandate all our courses, degree programs, have to have the social programs embedded in. You cannot graduate from us unless you finish certain hours of required activities related to the social impact, philanthropy, etc. So I would say the difference between the East and particularly China and the rest of the world and the West is China had a long been guided by the philosophers like Kongzi, which is Confucius, and Lao Tzu in this aspect. Confucianism teaching is all about the harmony, the social harmony, to achieve the social harmony on a high level. So they view the society as a whole, not just individually, not just think about you and your company and your family and your city. It thinks holistically. This is what they emphasize. You know, there's a long lecture about that, but Confucianism really emphasized the relationship between human being and the relationship between human being and society. So when we talk about business mutuality, and I can see very clearly from more than 2,500 years ago that our ancestor, the philosopher, had been talking about that. And this has been embedded in our blood because the impact of Confucianism is not just a short while. It has 2,500 years and is guiding everyday's daily life. And it also impacted Japan, for instance, and to Korea and to Southeast Asia countries, the what we call the Confucianism bloc. And the other philosopher in China is called Lao Tzu. His philosophy is emphasizing the relationship between human being and nature. So this is what we're talking about. How do we deal with the environmental issues? And Lao Tzu is almost at the similar time as Confucius. And a long time ago, more than 2,000 years ago, has been emphasizing on that. So we had a long tracking history and also guiding principle in the society. How can we create the balances between human being and in the society and also with the nature? So that is the difference that I want to first point it out. And you also asked me about, so in China, there's a lot of practice. For instance, one of our faculty in our school has consistently been considered to be the leader in promoting the business impact. So we have received a number of awards. Our dean recently received the very top award related to the impact. And on that note, one of our factory recently also published a book called Business for Good. So I'd be happy to share with you the link of that book. Now, you wanted me to give examples of what kind of the activity or business has been done in China related to the impact. For instance, I can mention quite a lot. For instance, Haidilao is one of the restaurant business. It was founded by one of our alumni, Mr. Zhang Yong, and I think he just graduated from us from a DBA program. But he created this restaurant chain. You know, restaurant is very traditional. You know, you go anywhere, you have good restaurant, bad restaurant. But he has decided to invent the restaurant business. Everybody liked hot pot in his hometown in Sichuan province. And now over China, people like hot pot because of him. And hot pot is not something new. But what is new is the traditional restaurant business does not consider the business mutuality, doesn't consider the impact, namely not just the financial impact, but also need to non-financial impact, which you just talked about. For instance, what he did is to give the employee the engagement. He took the employee from the rural areas to the big city. He understood, if you bring the husband to the city, the wife will miss the husband and you will create a negative social impact. So what he decided to do, bring the whole family. We provide you with accommodation so that you're happy. Your whole family moved to a city, which is upgrade your lifestyle. At the same time, you're together, you're working together, you're happily working together. They provide a lot of employee benefits, including the lodging and medical insurance, et cetera, which other restaurant businesses doesn't provide as easily. So just by doing small things like that, it creates a huge impact. And also they allow employee to have the empowerment. Employee can decide whether I can waive the charge to the customer. If the customer is not happy, the employee have the right to say, you don't need to pay. At the very beginning, people think that, oh, this is crazy. And then they may have relatives, friends, and stuff like that. They will come and eat for free. But once you give the employee the respect and they actually honor that, so their employee is so happy, they feel sense of the empowerment. As a result, their restaurant, when the employee is happy, the result is the customer is happy. They see the smile, they see their attentiveness. This is, by the way, it's a 24-hour restaurant chain. Don't ask me why people go there to eat at 3 a.m. But they do have people. Every place they open a new restaurant, there will be a long lineup for at least 3 hours globally. They have had a huge success, and their revenues right now is about, $4 billion US, and their market capitalization is reaching about $40 billion US. They opened nearly 1,000 restaurants globally, and they have a aim to open 5,000 restaurants globally because they are using AI technologies to do the sorting, processing, and delivering the dishes to the table. And so it's incredible. I just want to give you one. Maybe you're anxious because I can tell you a lot of cases.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful, very powerful. Also, what you mentioned about the nature of the quality of the relationships with the Confucius culture, and the empowerment, I think, is also very important. So now I would like us to actually dive a little bit into finance and investment. So if we look at that, investor scrutiny has been increasing over the last years. So investments that actually take into account some sort of non-financial considerations, whatever that means, represent today between 30 and 40 trillion dollars. So it's 30 to 40% of the worldwide assets, and they are growing rapidly. So, and we've seen a bit of a movement from a purely financial maximization approach to negative screening to ESG type of approach and impact investing, which is trading profit to do some good. So the question is a little bit, what's the next frontier? But also, is it good enough? Is it going in the right direction, or is it mostly greenwashing? So I would like now to invite Paul Gira to join us. And Paul is the MP of the Thompson Family Office. He's 20 years experience in investment management in the broad sense of the word. So asset management, wealth management, PE. He has also 10 years experience in external and internal auditing at EY and ING. And Paul is a CPA by background. So he's really actually the bridge between the accounting and the investment worlds. Paul, in the first decade of the century, banks precipitated a financial crisis that ultimately destroyed billions of dollars of shareholder value. So, and you've worked in the Wall Street capitalism, so you understand it well. So what did you think at the time of the crisis about the nature of capitalism, and how did it forge your convictions that letting financial returns drive behaviors was not a good thing? That's my first question. And my second question is, I would like to understand your perspective on where the industry, the investment industry stand really in terms of acting responsibly, and why is it difficult? Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Nadia, and thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. That first question is right to the heart. At the exact time in 2008, I was running an alternative asset management platform in New York City that covered hedge funds, fund of funds, and some private equity. And as a function of a group company that didn't perhaps evaluate, like many other large institutions, evaluate its risk, those decisions resulted in a financial crisis that required a government bailout. And then overnight, my whole division basically became a hobby as the firm struggled to get back on its feet. So years of building teams and evaluating how to achieve return for your investors became irrelevant as the firm tried to transition and try to get back to its core businesses. So within that paradigm, you can even say within the broader community of investment, but even in an organization, these large conglomerates, I think of it as a living organism. Some parts of an organization can have cancer that can take down the whole body, the community of that organization. So those points hit, very close home to me, because over the years, I've also had another interesting experience, even in London with Oxford area, where I was part of a team that came and tried to bring world-class investment banking back to life, called Barings. And after the collapse of Barings in February 1995, ING Group bought that asset over the weekend as part of a crisis within that organization, with 52 licenses around the world immediately put into receivership. And then we had to demonstrate around the world that this group company could have the controls, infrastructure, and the standards to bring that bank back to life again. And that was a well-regarded historical bank with Baring Brothers, which was a top-notch advisory firm. It had a Baring Asset Management that was actually managing the Queen's money. And thirdly, there was the introduction of Baring Securities that came in at the height of the derivatives market, which ultimately was a function that took the bank down because there wasn't a proper evaluation of risk assessment. And in many cases, not understandings of the products and the values and the risks that the organization took. So going back to that first question, I think we all know in the financial services industry, there's more need for measurement and control and evaluation. Firms can't be hamstringed so much that they cannot operate and over compliance, but there are certain values and principles that are screaming out to require change. And when I listen to panels like EOM and the areas of social, human, environmental capitalism, along with financial capitalism, those things need to be put in balance. And sometimes we are concerned that even with some of these highly profile financial crises and disasters, that the pendulum swings too far back the other way. We don't want that either, because foreign direct investment and the financial mechanism makes the world go around in many cases, but should be supporting profoundly social, human, and environmental dimensions as well. And and I think the world's moved on quite nicely in that direction, or has been moving in that direction. To your other question, how is that impacting the investment world? I can take you back to a story back to around it was the early 90s when I worked at Harvard Endowment. Even that period of time, it was deemed radical to have negative screens. We were one of the first universities that would not invest in South Africa because of apartheid, and then related areas around tobacco and these so-called negative screens. And I can remember the CEO at the time, Jack Meyer, getting phone calls from all around the planet saying, what are you doing? Why are you being an activist in the way you're deploying Harvard Endowment's capital? So from that starting point in my career, and over time, you saw the evolution and the movement towards ESG and the movement of what the UN was doing with the UN PRIs and bringing that movement along where people started adapting it. And then you got into the world after ESG to impact investing, where that's where the family offices and the endowments would go after areas of investment that would say, I want to make an investment that reflect my values, but equally generate a reasonable return or a concessionary return. And quite frankly, I don't think that's even good enough into itself. I think the core investment strategies out there should reflect these dimensions of social, human, environmental, and financial capitalism holistically, and not one or balancing the others. Because more currently, there's a real movement, especially with the millennials and Gen Zs wanting to go after the ESG impact investment. So there's a movement towards new funds coming up that tend to look at the E of ESG more than the S and G. And we've heard about that a little bit yesterday, where E quickly turns into solar, wind, and renewables, when really that's not really addressing the core question of how you drive those other areas of social, human, environmental capitalism next to a good financial capitalism mechanism. So, so there's a real nice way now to start thinking about the next generation of ESG, if I put it that way. And that's what intrigued me about EOM and meeting Jay and Bruno, because when I looked at the cover of their book, it said, healing businesses to heal the world. And that struck me. Healing a business, like a human organism, right? You got the brain trust, you got the heart, and all parts of that human, that corporate body has to work in tandem. The whole thing could collapse. And I've seen collapses with Barings and the financial crisis. Take that a little bit further, that human organism, that corporate body should be expressed more formally into the broader communities and people and activism in a healthy way, not one or the other, but inclusive of these areas. So a lot has happened over the years, and I expect a lot more will continue. And when we heard Alistair earlier, he's spot on about getting these measurements, these other groups beyond the financial accounting firms and government organizations to really engage with business in a more profound way. But at the end of the day, investment is investment, and our investors and the family office I work for, they expect good returns, and at what cost? And those good returns require an evaluation of not just financial returns, but the returns in those other areas. And if I was thinking back to my private equity days, you were always measured against a so-called peer group. And that is way assets were allocated. And that peer group also got defined in terms of IRRs and multiples of your returns, okay? And that was driven also by another group that drives, or are called gatekeepers, which are asset consultants. And they would recommend to their clients this whole notion of investing for getting your maximizing return in your asset allocation. Taking a step back from that, we really need the focus to be on those asset consultants. So, and they are really more formally have the tools to engage with private equity firms to recommend to their investors the need for a more holistic point of capital return beyond just financial capitalism.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think it's very clear. So we've moved on. So it's a good news, but we are not there yet in terms of integrating holistically, all the dimensions, all the non-financial dimensions, also with the constraint of having good financial returns. I would like now to welcome Lynn Hermine Janto, and it's also a good transition because you've been talking about the millennials, and so Lynn works in a global investment bank and runs her own family office, and she knows the ultra high net worth community very well, and we're talking about families which have over $100 million in liquid net worth. And Lynn, maybe my first question is, what have you observed in the last 10 years, 5-10 years, in the way the ultra high net worth individuals think about their investments, especially in your region, Southeast Asia? And have you observed differences across generation, maybe across countries? And finally, what are the criteria that drive your own investment decision making in your family office?
Sure. Hi, Nadia, and greetings from Singapore. I'm not an economist and I'm not an accountant, but I've certainly spent a great number of years helping some of the most successful families in Asia become bigger and more financially successful. I would say, unlike their European and American counterparts, most of the wealthy families in Asia are still in the first or second generation of wealth creation. So they're far earlier in the phase compared to their global counterparts. And in most of these cases, the patriarch or matriarch of the family will still make key decisions on both the corporate side, M&A, divestitures, debt raising, as well as the private side, which is on portfolio construction and philanthropy. They may have their investment committees and they may have family offices set up, but in most cases, the principals alone ultimately decide on how their capital is to be deployed. And in all my time in dealing with these principals, they've been entirely focused about chasing financial returns and investment alpha, mostly based on cash flow outlook and valuation. Subjects and topics like board diversity and governance were really not things of consideration. But I would say that I've seen a shift in perspective in recent years, really driven by millennials demanding their parents to think about managing companies and managing investments differently. I think they feel that we have shifted the global economy away from workers, away from communities, away from families for far too long. And they believe, and so do I, that companies should create value, not just for shareholders, but for employees, communities, and the planet. In this regard, I'm particularly thankful that sovereign wealth funds in the region, as well as very large asset managers, have really taken the lead in spearheading this mindset shift in the region. In conclusion, I would say that Asian investors still have a very long way to go in terms of their general awareness and conviction levels towards ESG or impact investing compared to the rest of the world. The awareness and adoption levels in Southeast Asia, actually Asia in general, remain very low. The statistics I've seen were something like low single digits of total managed assets in Asia ex-Japan. So in my understanding today with the people and the peers that I deal with, ESG and impact investing is seen as very siloed and exotic. One would gain exposure into an ESG fund as one would into a sexy blockchain fund. So unfortunately, that's the state of things today out here in Southeast Asia. With regards to your second question on how we've been looking at investments on the family office side, I must say that it really has been a journey for us. It's not something we crystallized on day one, but we had always known that purpose and profit can be intertwined. And we figure we'll just think big and we'll start small. We'll take baby steps and we just simply learn by doing. But I did learn from my parents from very early on that we had to be good stewards to whatever that has been placed in our hands. And so we understood right from the start that our capital had a voice. And we began really being particularly conscious to exclude sectors as well as countries that we knew we did not want to sow into. And this would include countries that did not have good rule of law, as well as companies that we thought lacked ethical leadership. So exclusion was the easy part. Next came really engagement. And that's a little bit more tricky. But one of the things that I learned from the Asian tycoons I dealt with over the years is this, that habits shape character. and character determines destiny. And that has really shaped my philosophy when it comes to money management as well as investment management. So if character were to determine the future outlook, longevity, and trajectory of a company, then I cannot help but pay attention to what leadership is saying about its priorities as well as its purpose, because leadership sets culture and tone. And being a responsible company extends far beyond just having a CSR commitment. And my view is ultimately we can only tell a tree by its fruits. And so we have to dig in deeper and find out what are they doing in terms of executive compensation? Are they engaging other stakeholders? Are they taking care of employees? We also spend a lot of time with fund managers and GPs, and I must say that we've learned a lot from their experiences. And we spend a lot of time trying to understand how the GPs themselves integrate ESG scores into their traditional selection process. And we like dealing with partners who demand ESG disclosures from their investee companies, as well as push them along to just be more socially conscious and responsible. And then over time for us, the strategy really involves tilting and reallocating capital towards companies and GPs that are scoring higher in these areas that we deem as important.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And yeah, let's hope we move in the right direction in Southeast Asia, and your family can also act as an example of what can be done. Now I would like to discuss a little bit more the question of measurement. And there has been already a very, an introduction done by Colin, Bruno, and Alastair on the topic. Just wanted to remind us a few things. So as Paul Polman said yesterday, we treasure what we measure. So that means we really need to get it right if we truly want to change the behaviors. Today, there is a lot of confusion. I just wanted to give you that if you look at ESG metrics, for example, a working paper by MIT Sloan School of Management called Aggregate Confusion shows that the ESG ratings from the 5 main providers actually disagree dramatically on where a company stands in terms of non-financial performance. So that being said, there is also an ongoing effort supported by the Impact Project, Management Project, the WEF and Deloitte to harmonize corporate reporting system. I think the question also that was raised about the relationship between financial performance and non-financial performance is critical. EOM and the Hybrid Matrix Initiative by FSG, NL Foundation, HBS, and Shared Value Initiative aim at providing a framework for that type of relationship. So today, if we look at today, there are 3 ways of thinking in terms of measurement. The first one, and I'm just recalling what's been said, but I think it's important for the debate, is the cost accounting. It's rethinking basically the way we compute corporate profit by internalizing the bad costs on society, like depolluting a river, and externalizing the good costs, if you want, such as investing in skill building or higher confidence. That's the first one. The second one is the valuation. So attaching a dollar value to human, social, natural assets and liabilities. So we actually put a price or value to lives or to other things. And the third one, is reporting. And we can report the progress on non-financial metrics. It can be ESG or other metrics. So now the question I have for our panelists is really, how are we going to help promote a more responsible and performance business practice by leveraging these 3 methods of measurement? And I would like now to welcome Clara Barbie, who is the CEO of the Impact Management Project, a forum for building global consensus on how to measure and manage impacts. She has also 15 years experience in the investment industry, and she's been together with HBS and the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, leading that effort on valuation. Clara, we would love to understand a little bit more how how the methodology basically works. What's the logic of putting a monetary value to non-material assets and liabilities, and how do you do? I know there is an allocation mechanism per company. How does that work? And the second question I would have is, what success look like for you? So what is the intent behind that methodology? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, I'm going to answer that question. But before I do, I'm going to give you some context that I think will make the answer easier to understand. And that is that I think the explaining that those three forms of measurement makes sense. I think it's very important, though, that we understand the connections between them. And so when I think about actually Bruno's observations at the beginning of the session, and the fact that in some ways we started, what do they say, horse before cart with reporting, and actually should have focused on the internal measurement techniques and management first that was meaningful, and then had reporting. I think he is absolutely right theoretically. What I think is really important to consider, though, is that incentives are everything in this area, as we've heard from the other panelists, right? And just seeing even today that ESG and impact is still considered niche in some markets. You need the incentives for this whole area to develop. And I would argue that although, it might seem theoretically strange that the reporting came first, I think what we've seen is that it's the external stakeholders to companies who rely on that reporting who are creating, in some, I think for a lot of companies, the incentives to actually then do it internally and do the measurement and do the management. So I'm not sure in practice whether it's necessarily a problem that we started with reporting, because I think it created that incentive. The question now, though, is how do we make sure that from a theoretical perspective, we get to something meaningful and sensible, and the whole thing actually ultimately gets designed exactly as Bruno said. So we really reflect on what's meaningful internally and then correct the reporting, as it were, in light of that. And so I think that's what's happening. But the other thing I wanted to say is that when we talk about valuation, as the second strand, which I will go on and answer your questions about technique. Valuation is not divorced from reporting, because both of them at the moment rely on a foundation of metrics. So when you do a socioeconomic valuation for a company, you are looking, as both you and Bruno said, at the socioeconomic value that is occurring in the real world based on the company's activities. Now, to understand that, it is a classic logic model or pathway or theory of change. These techniques have different names. They've been used in disciplines like social science, development, government for a very long time. And it's a question of saying, well, what is the company's organizational context and activities? And then what are the pathways that you can understand to connect their activities to the real world impact that occurs as a result? And when you map out that pathway, you can then start to do the calculation. Now, inherent to that pathway is metrics. So what happens is you say, well, the company has this kind of activity. We're going to have to figure out what the best way to measure the level of that activity is, so that we can then use that literally in the calculation to times it by a monetary coefficient. The monetary coefficient is usually drawn, in the best, most precise cases, it's actually drawn from primary research in that context. More often than not, it relies on secondary research that's already been done, often with some tailoring that is required to make it fit for purpose in the particular real context of the company. But in effect, your simple calculation, if I was to make this very, very simple, is to take the performance on the metric, which is looking at the level of activity or output, or ideally outcome, if you can measure that, and timesing it by what research has shown is the socioeconomic value of that. Now, the reason I thought that was important to start with is that when you look at the status of reporting today, reporting is stopping at the metrics. So it's not as though valuation necessarily needs to be, reporting needs a fundamental change. What we need is that reporting in effect goes further. So we need to get to a point where the metrics are the ones that are both meaningful within companies and then also form the basis of reporting. And the reporting on metrics needs to continue, but one would expect over time, as this area becomes more sophisticated, that companies would start to not just provide performance on the metrics, but actually then provide the valuation of that based on applying a socioeconomic coefficient to it, to say, well, and this is what that became. So we emitted, this many tons of carbon, and we times that by the social cost of carbon based on academic research. And that means that this is our socioeconomic, negative contribution in this time period. That's a very simple example, but you can do this for many, many different areas. So that's where I wanted to start. The next thing I wanted to say is that the reason why that the evolution from reporting on metrics to ultimately reporting on valuation is full of potential is because if I go what might seem very radical for a moment, but is actually a true way to think about equality, when you look at the purpose of financial accounting, it is to enable economic decision making. And when the Italian who designed the financial accounting methodology did so, he said, for goodness sake, do not use this as the basis for an economic system. It only accounts for one form of value. Bruno is extremely eloquent on this. The reality is that the way in which we do financial accounting is actually a public policy decision. So the IFRS is a crucial player because they provide that global body for accounting standards, but it is governments ultimately who decide that they are the right body to mandate to do this. And a radical end vision would be that over time, the purpose of accounting is changed to be total value accounting. And if you think about that, and then these socioeconomic value calculations become crucial because in effect, that is what would enable you to calculate profit net of externalities. And if you had that, and dividends were being paid out net of externalities, it would be a great leveler. But I say that as a radical end vision because right now, I think what we should all be very, very focused on is what I see as the first stepping stone toward an ultimate vision like that, which is actually that we need a global standard setting body with that legitimacy like IFRS has, even for the metrics. We're at a point in time right now where that would be a huge step forward. And to have agreement on how every company discloses health and safety performance, carbon, employment impacts, I could go on and on, even looking toward product would be, I think, an incredible leap in terms of maturity. And I think that is a conversation that everyone needs to be coalescing around at this point, because I'll just close by saying I've never been more optimistic that that metrics piece will progress because of the regulatory interest that we're seeing from the European Commission, from the securities regulators at the IOSCO level. I feel that the next 12 months are the moment to progress that, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Clara. Very clear. And so I understand that changing the regulation for you is key, basically. It will become key at some point if we really want to drive a change in behaviors. Christian, I'd like to invite Christian Heller, who is the CEO of Value Balancing Alliance, which aims at changing the way how company performance is measured and valued, and improving also business steering. Christian is also a VP at BASF, where he has been working for the last 15 years. So I think, Christian, what would be interesting is, I think, so Clara started also by, saying, look, reporting is important. I mean, we need to choose, obviously, the right matrix, and there needs to be somehow a way of tying up that to the incentives. But today, it's not yet proved effective in changing behaviors. So I wanted to understand a little bit, your contributions through VBA and your perspectives between, especially the valuation and the cost accounting, which method serves what purpose, what objective, and what is the right way. Do you also think regulation will be core to actually enforce one of them, maybe the two of them, I don't know. And the second question I would have is, it would be interesting to get some examples of your member companies, BASF or another one, in terms of initiatives they've taken to actually change their measurement internally. Thank you.
Many thanks. So first of all, thanks for all of the inputs, because I can easily build on this one. And one major piece is, yes, the main initiatives as of today, or the main focus of the work, relates to reporting schemes and reporting exercises. But as already outlined, if businesses are honest with themselves, reporting has not changed the business models of companies. So we need to think about other ways how we are changing the business model if we really want to have something like a sustainable economy based on contributions by businesses or solutions by businesses. The easiest way is go via incentive schemes, and they need to be integrated into, in the end, accounting. This means controlling and finance. This is the only way how you get there. The Value Balancing Alliance was founded last year. It's an alliance consisting of, as of today, 14 international companies. We are also collaborating with all of the big 4 major auditing firms who are contributing as pro bono consultants into our work. It was mentioned that collaboration is key as of today. So the Value Balancing Alliance is collaborating with international organizations like the OECD, the EU Commission, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. For sure, we are collaborating quite closely with academics such as Harvard. We are also working closely together with business initiatives and other initiatives in this area, like the Impact Management Project, like the World Business Council, like the Capitals Coalition, and others. I have the same thinking as Clara, that we are currently in a time frame or in a window of opportunity that we can really change how business is operating based on reporting schemes, but also, and this is essential, the integration of the current ESG factors, intangibles, non-financials, however you call them, into a consistent accounting framework. And this is essentially the piece we are working on as VBA. So for us, it's all about the foundation of accounting, of reporting, because if you want to report something, you need to get the data right. And if you don't get the data right or comparable, it does not make sense for external stakeholders to look into reports if you can't compare results. So the work we are doing within the VBA is we are working on two methodology strands at the end. The first one is, what is the value contribution of companies to the wider society? In essence, this is a methodology we're developing how you can assess, measure, and value the externalities of a business model along the complete value chain, talking about the positive and negative contribution of businesses to society, to the wider economy, and to nature. So Clara mentioned this already. Concepts like the social cost of carbon are key for us to get this integrated. And just to give you a flavor, in our current calculations, we are using a valuation coefficients of over 90 euros for a ton of CO2. So this is really going beyond the metrics. This is going into the direction of valuation. The key purpose of this methodology area is in the end to fundamentally understand what is the license to operate of a business model. And if you're monetizing or valuing the impacts of businesses, you get a clear understanding is there's in total a positive contribution or a negative contribution of the business model. And if it's negative, we need to think about how we can incentivize these business models or these industries to improve how we're doing business, or if we in the end need totally transform these businesses. I'm giving you one example. We have one company in my alliance, which is LafargeHolcim from the cement business. And depending on the valuation coefficients for CO2 and for water consumption, the complete business model will turn net negative. The question we need to ask us, if this is the case, do we pay enough for cement? Or is there an alternative for cement to build our infrastructure? These are the questions coming up. The second methodology we are working on is in the end, how can you get a much better picture on the enterprise value? It was mentioned in the beginning from Bruno, I think, that Paul Polman mentioned that only 15% of the current value of an enterprise is captured in the financial statements. Giving you one example, if a company is investing in training of their employees, so building up human capital, as of today, this is just on the cost side of your balance sheet. If I'm investing in a car, this is a positive asset. And at least for me, this is somehow strange. So we need to think about how do we, in a complementary way, extending the current accounting systems at the company level, including natural, social, human capital, and governance aspects, to have a broader view on the value creation of a company in itself. And this is the second part of the methodology work we are doing. One of the USPs we have within our alliance is that our members are committed to pilot the methodologies we are developing directly in their operations. So in the end, we see directly how this is influencing decision-making and steering at the company level. And this will also inform the further development of the methodology, which in the end is built when we are talking about the scope or the system boundaries on the current reporting frameworks which are introduced, and all of the work which is currently going on, mentioned also by Clara, the harmonization of the reporting frameworks. Nevertheless, what we are heading for is not just coming up with methodologies which are applied by a few companies and will end up on a website. What we need to do is a system change. And here we are coming back to incentive systems. And for companies, this is all about incentives based on the global market economy. Here we are talking to financial market players. And here we are talking to, in the end, policymakers of this world to understand and to transform the system we are working in. Just providing you another example, what can we do in the financial market, especially via impact investing, to increase capital reallocation to companies who are working in this direction? So think about tax incentives for investors to put their money into corporates who are running in this direction. You also ask the question, how is this changing businesses? So I give you just the example of BASF, where I was heading this program before I entered the Value Balancing Alliance. When we are talking about impacts, we are shifting the understanding of value drivers. When we are talking of impacts, taxes and wages, for example, mean this is about purchase power, not costs anymore. So as a company, you should increase this. And this is totally shifting the mindset within a company when it comes to decision making. And this is a huge journey which we are running into. I just give you the example again from BASF. When we started this project and showed the first figures, the board of directors told us we should never disclose this as a company. After 3 years of the project, we were discussing intensively what is the right social cost price for carbon, if it's 60 euros, 70, 80, or 90, and also discussing the concepts behind. So you see there's a tremendous change going on. The good thing about a more holistic steering model or data set in the end, it is totally changing the view of corporate management, including the board of directors, how you make decisions. As of today, or until a few years ago, corporates were really trained just to steer their businesses along one indicator. And this was just profits. And this is easy. If we are now establishing additional indicators next to this, like a climate target or like a human capital target, whatever, you will have trade-offs if you see them equally reliable. And this is something companies are not used to. And methodologies we are currently developing will enable businesses to make informed decisions about this one, fully understanding trade-offs, and therefore the valuation. So having the same, let's call it the same currency to value financial, social, human, and natural capital is essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for helping us understand a little bit better, you know, how everything can actually be complementary also. There are questions. I have a lot of other questions, but I think I also need to let questions from the audience, you know, go through. So maybe there's one question around for companies that actually want to move in that direction and embark on a transformation journey. What would be the advice in terms of practical, actionable items that they can use today? So maybe I will ask Paul and Lynn as investors, you know, to give their thoughts on that question. Do you want to start?
Is Paul starting? I thought he was. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lynn. Okay, I'll start. As investors, there's practical areas around. You know, I want to go back to how private equity or other public market companies are operating and how they're being evaluated by their peer groups. And one area is this area I mentioned of asset consultants, where when you go to raise money or you're trying to benchmark yourselves against other folks, and where I live this regularly when you set up new funds, or when I was in my prior role setting up new portfolios, you were evaluated against benchmarks, against other groups, and target IRRs. And if you get those groups online with a methodology, around how to measure and monitor impact more broadly around these other dimensions beyond just standard ESG asset classes, as one said, and apply that methodology with clear metrics. I think they could be a big influence on allowing this next generation. And I wouldn't underestimate the next generation of millennials and Gen Zs who expect more from their investments, the way that money's being managed, and their inputs into it, right? There's been this kind of disconnect there. And I think working with the broader financial and investment community, at least on the buy side, the asset management side, I think you could affect a lot of change.
I would absolutely agree with that, Paul. And I think sometimes the subject of, going into impact investing or ESG is something so huge for a lot of investors. And my advice is, again, to take baby steps and to learn by doing. Exclusion is probably the easiest way to go. That's how we started. And then aligning yourself with GPs and players in the market that have a lot more familiarity with this space and learning how they are keeping up and measuring ESG performances on companies they're investing in. So we really spent a lot of time with the likes of PIMCO and BlackRock, and it was a wonderful learning experience and partnership with them. And I think it's something I really encourage investors to spend time doing.
Thank you very much. There is a second question that is quite, there are lots of questions, but I'm taking only a few, otherwise we will be short of time. So a question around giving some example of conviction-based firms that are dedicated to sustainable investments or causes today. And what are the leaders? Who are the leaders? And I wanted maybe to ask Clara, Christian, and Boji to react to that, because I know typically, Clara, in the work you've been doing, some companies are doing better than others in a given sector. So that would be interesting to get your views on that, and Christian and Boji as well.
Great, absolutely. And actually, I am currently Chief Executive of the Impact Management Project and have been for the last 5 years, will continue to be for the next 2. But I have to be honest, I'm still technically on secondment. It's just been a long secondment. And my background is as a partner at one of the first investment management firms to pioneer, quote unquote, sustainable investing and impact investing. So I think I can speak to that with firsthand experience as one of the leaders in this area. Bridges has been doing this for a very long time. And I think the reason that you're hearing from me today, an encouragement that we don't, worry too much about, is it reporting first? Is it management internally first? But rather we need both, is because what I've seen through personal investing at that firm is that it's actually, for change to happen, you need the dialogue between the companies or the assets, if it's property, and the investor, because everything Christian described, I couldn't support more. I think it's very hard at board level for the discussion to genuinely the decisions to be made in favor of saying this is a trade-off. We know it's going to hit the financials in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, unless there's an expectation that can be communicated to investors in a way that they will appreciate and understand. And so I do think it's incredibly important. What I've learned from the leaders, I would say that Generation Investment Management is another leader in this area, and I suspect that they would have a similar point to make, that they're incredibly engaged investors, and this is always a dialogue. So do look at Generation and do look at Bridges, whoever asked that question. And of course, as was just said, PIMCO, BlackRock, I would put Neuberger Berman, I would put Bailey Gifford. If you're looking at public markets investing, there's some really interesting stuff going on there as well.
You want to be next?
So being a representative from the industry, I would not add to the list of Clara, because she's much more informed in this area than I am. What I can emphasize is, if you want to push corporates going in this direction of impact measurement, impact valuation, and providing the figures for the financial market to make evaluations, the easiest way is, as Clara mentioned already, get in contact and in a dialogue with the corporates via roadshows, via their general meetings, and just ask these questions. And then we are moving. Looking at the corporate world, there are a few initiatives within the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. There's what is called Impact Measurement and Valuation Roundtable. There's our alliance, and there corporates quite engaged in the Capitals Coalition or also in the Impact Management Project. So look at these companies and you will find currently the status or let's say the best practices where corporates are heading for in this regard. What I see as well, and this goes a little bit back to the question before, just reach out to these players who are already active in this field, because there's lots of knowledge out there, lots of experience out there. Don't start everything from scratch on your own. Reach out to the people. It's all about collaboration. And from the financial market side, as well as from the real economy side, the experts are more than open to share their knowledge.
Thank you, Christian. Boji, do you also want to give an example of a company or that's been doing quite well in that cause? And I know you've given one already.
Yeah.
With the recent.
I have another one, which is Alipay. Alipay is part of NonFinancials, and NonFinancials perhaps is the largest unicorn in the world, and just went to IPO. So Alipay has created something called Ali Ant Forest. This is a very astonishing investment. This is actually co-investment between the Alipay and also the consumer. So this initiative has attracted 500 million users. The idea is to plant the trees, real trees, not hypothetical virtual trees, but real trees in the northern part of China. And so they have attracted 500 million users, which is about 7% of the global population. So that's quite impactful. And they planted 100 million trees already and impacted about 112,000 hectares and creating about 400,000 jobs, local jobs for that. So it's a simple concept that Alibaba would match whatever the consumer donate to plant the tree. They can actually see the trees. So from their apps, so that really getting everybody to think about it, and the consumer like to show that. Okay, I planted a tree, so now here on my app and showing my WeChat moment, and it's a great thing. So they cleverly utilize their brand power. And also the user, each individual have this desire to creating an impact, whether it's big or small. So I think investment like that is a great example where China is doing a lot of those kind of things to activating not just your own investment, but also the investment from the society, which you channel those investments through the good cause, which could create a very sizable impact. Because if you just invest your own money, that's limited. But if you are motivating, activating the society to do the same thing, to do the good things for the society, and then you can create a very much sizable impact.
Thank you for a very inspiring example. Maybe as we have 5 minutes left, even less, I would like to ask each of you, let's say in less than 1 minute, to share a little bit, if you had a sort of personal commitment for the cause, I would say, to share what that commitment would be, in the next 5-10 years, what's really, important for you and that you can actually do. So who starts? Boji, do you want to start?
In the next 5-10 years, I would really see that globally, the impact will be connected and together. So it should be a coordinated effort globally. And I like to introduce something called impact credit. We have the emission credit, CO2 emission credit. But why we shouldn't introduce something called impact credit, which we're working on it. And we have created a club called Impact 17+1 Club in London, which is promoting this kind of concept that every business, business should be all impact driven. Cannot be just, do whatever you like to do. It's not allowed. You need to buy the credit in order to do what you are doing, which creating maybe damages. But you can earn the credit if you're doing something good to the society.
Thank you, Boji. Paul, do you want to be next?
Sure. This area of family offices are fascinating, and you're starting to see their big movement around the world where there's a lot of capital on the sidelines that's ready to be pounced into this area of impact and more broadly with defined measures, but achieving good returns. So I'd say over the next 5 years to work with other family office groups to think about setting up a structure, a fund, whether it's a formal fund or an independent sponsor that really starts driving this methodology into the way that these companies that we go after to invest in execute and have really definable measurement as part of this broader holistic movement that's happening in today's society.
Thank you, Paul. Lynn?
For me, I think I believe that we need to stand for the change we want to see. And for me, that would mean really to continue directing capital towards good and be a voice for transformation in my community and really pulling people into my ecosystem, providing a seat for them and creating that momentum for transformation, a conversation at a time. And to really create awareness that our capital has a voice and that the future we want tomorrow is really determined by what we're sowing in today.
Thanks, Lina. And then Clara and Christian.
Thank you. So I think as my the chair of the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, Sir Ronald Cohen, with whom I work looking at valuation, as he said, transparency is becoming a human right. And I think that we're going to see that continue, that shift to a normative expectation on transparency, I think is going to continue and it needs to continue. And so I think with that, one of the most important things that needs to happen, and I certainly want to help make happen, is that transparency reaches the ultimate asset owners. I think the current structure of the capital market makes it very difficult for the real asset owners, who is very often all of us here on the phone through our bank accounts and our savings, to be connected transparently with what our money is doing. And I think we have to figure out how to make that connection. Because if we don't, structurally, I think it will be very difficult to change the world.
Okay, I would approach this from a principal point of view. And what we are committed and what I'm committed to, we are now heading for a huge transformation. And this will require a mindset change. And this will be quite a tricky and painful journey for most of the players which are currently in the market, including us as individuals and as consumers. So for me, the 4 key principles, what we need to take into account to drive this process is, first of all, transparency, which was mentioned many, many times already. And this is not just about data, this is also about the processes, how we are heading for this transformation. The second one was mentioned as well, it's about collaboration. It does not make sense if we're talking about each other. We not just need to talk with each other, we need to drive this with each other. And the last point, and here I'm talking especially from the corporate point of view, it's all about simplicity. If we don't make these methodologies and the systems for integration simple, we will not be successful.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of you for your very valuable inputs, but also your commitment, and congratulate you for everything you're doing. And I'll use Christian's word, let's thrive with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. That was a fantastic conversation, and we really appreciate your moderation there, Nadia. Next up, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, who is the Global CFO for Mars Incorporated, Klaus Agard.
Hello, everybody. My name is Klaus Agard. I'm the CFO of Mars Incorporated, and along both supporter of the Economics of Mutuality initiative and colleague of Bruno Ross and many of his team members. Thank you for allowing me to contribute to your conversation here today. Unfortunately, it'll have to be in the form of a video, as Mr. Ross, in the spirit of mutuality, did point out that this would be rather late in the night for me, that I would have to come up and participate live. So thank you for allowing me to do it via video, and I hope you're all well. It's obviously very unusual times that we are living in, and there has been many conversations when you follow the the media, whether this is going to impact negatively, really the decade that we are in, where we need to make significant progress on ESG, a broader mutuality agenda or not. I'm firmly in the camp, and I think I have evidence based on the things we are discussing here at Mars, the decisions we're making right now, that's not going to be the case. I really think, like in any crisis, there is an opportunity to accelerate things, and I like to believe this year is an area that is going to be ripe for innovation and progress as we come out of the COVID crisis. In the time available, I wanted to talk about three things with you. How, with what we call the Mars Compass, we are bringing together economics and mutuality and the way we do business at Mars. I want to talk a little bit about the role of finance in general, and then touch lightly on some of the things I'm focused on, with my team. With our shareholders, we have defined a set of shareholder objectives. Obviously, we're a private company, and often, you find that maybe because we don't have a stock market that marks us every day, etc., and we've been run by the founders up until a couple of decades ago, we really didn't have a comprehensive good set of metrics by which we measure success. And we've done a lot of work on that the last couple of years and really defined, the purpose of the company, the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today, and around that defined what we call the Mars Compass, which really has got four, quadrants to it. It's about positive societal impact. It's about being a trusted partner. It's about what we call quality of growth, which is really being well positioned, for growth. As we know, this is what drives prosperity of any entity, and it's about strong financial performance, of course. I find this a very good set of objectives, a very good framework, very contemporary as well, and ironically something that I think very much represent the way we've been doing business, for quite a long time at Mars Incorporated. We call it purpose-led or holistic value creation. I'll come back to some of the, the challenges that we always find, but I find it very congruent, because it's obviously clear without having an economic engine driven by good quality growth that produce economic value, it's hard to make more longer term investments that create a positive societal impact and bring continued trust and renewed trust and invigorates trust in corporations, like ours. On the other hand, if we do not put enough effort behind positive societal impact and being a trusted partner, I certainly am one of those that strongly believe that, over time there will be, no quality growth, because talent will start to leave the building and consumers will not come to our franchise for their products and services. So really, and in the end, that leads to, inferior financial performance and we are on a negative spiral. So really a great, congruent, yet very challenging framework for us to put into operation, of course. We've agreed with our board and therefore shareholders is to also align remuneration of senior management towards this compass. We are not quite there yet with all of the metrics and the right balance, but the idea really is that a person like me will be rewarded 1 quarter on each of the 4 quadrants. So highly incentivized to make sure that we get, the balance right and make progress on all of them. I would also say, as sort of 30 years doing business now, and as an executive for many of those, the concept of a balanced scorecard, which to some degree you could argue this year is always challenging with leading and lagging indicators, and there's always some metrics that lends itself better to sum up the total input and output, of an organization. And you may agree and think it's fortunate or unfortunate that financial metrics are always, in that, top bracket of good metrics. So, really managing this and getting the equal balance in the way we make decisions, the way we set our strategies, the way we allocate our resource, is critical and not easy. But I definitely think it is representative of a new form of market, economy, one which consumers and society expect us to live up to as a big corporation, and as I said, one that is challenging, particularly when some of the things we really need to change are so long-term trends that, sometimes on a 3 to 5 year planning horizons, it's hard to predict or see or measure, a measurable difference. But here comes finance. I think, the role of finance is critical in bringing this to life, this new form of market economy, by us maybe expressed by, the Mars Compass. We are the custodians of all assets, all records, in the company, or at least I'd like to think so. That's at least one of the reasons why, I come to work increasingly also, and certainly that is the case for me and many of my CFOs, heavy influence, heavy guardian, heavy, almost decision maker in strategy and this strategic resource allocation to what we call economic cells, in the company. And in the end, finance tends to be, the business partner of the CEO that holds the purse. And with that comes opportunities to really make a difference, and becomes a responsibility as well to make sure we get this right and invest in the right thing. And one of the things I've really been pushing for is let's not have, ESG, mutuality, societal investments, whatever you want to call them, as a separate agenda. It already starts with having a different, for instance, sustainability team. Yes, we need to do that for a number of technical reasons, but we really need to embed the thinking in the businesses that we are driving. Our managers and leaders out there need to understand the short-term and long-term input-output impact of what they do on all dimensions. And that's what we're working hard, to try and achieve. And I think we have some good examples where we have aligned, not the compass so much, but, a broader ESG agenda and purpose to some of our brands. We are probably not recording properly all the ins and outs, but we're certainly aligning and driving investments toward a number of initiatives. And I think with the Economics of Mutuality initiative at Mars for a number of years, there are a number of case studies, which I'm sure Bruno Ross and the team is sharing with you, that really illustrates how we are in a micro examples that all adds up are creating new business models. And I think this is very interesting and innovative. So it's unique, and it's very important for finance to get hold of this agenda. I think some of the challenges for me at a more conceptual level is, as I said earlier, some of the finance numbers really sums up well a lot of activities. And when I talk to my business partners out there, how can we have metrics that are as good as and as robust as some of us still would argue an IRR measure, at least for the financials. And that doesn't have to be like just short-term financials. That can also be long-term, returns and value creation plans, etc. How can we embed in a way that is not subject to too much interpretation, too much argument over how it's defined, that this is the metric by which we measure things. And I know, and some of you in this audience here also are either proponents of or even innovators and authors of, new principles of thinking about adjusting the management reporting, the accounting, and broader measurement of business. I'm very interested in this. We are searching for sure for how to do this. I've had many suggestions past my desk from inside the company of doing some, more random adjustments to the way we value the company. It needs to be more robust for me than that. We spent hundreds of years refining the way the accounting system work and the measurement system, and we need to develop something, as robust, as that, and this is clearly one of our, priorities. So around this Mars Compass with my team, we have defined a whole raft of things that we are really, going to help the business get stronger at. And the 4 areas that we focused the most on right now this year to get immerse ourselves in some learning, develop some thinking, also together with the Economics of Mutuality organization is, first of all, evolving our management reporting and decision making. It's easier actually to change some of the decision making because I don't have to have it roll up into a new form of a profit number if you want. But we really want to evolve that, and we're doing work to immerse ourselves in what's the best understanding out there and what could we implement. I'm also clear that while we do externally report a very good sustainability in a generation report, which is what our broad ESG initiative is called, we do need to align ourselves to some of the external disclosure statement principles that are there, and there are hundreds to choose from. So we are going to determine our level of readiness and determine which one we want to go for, so we are ready in 1 or 2 years' time to report along one of those lines. We have a large pension investment at Mars Incorporated. We want to, look at how we can put some criteria around the way we think about our pension investments and contributing to getting, the balance right there in a broader ESG context. And similar really on the treasury side or the debt financing side. We are obviously in the public markets, also not with stock, but with 144A, etc. There will be requirements put upon us, and for sure we would also, like to make sure that, the way we raise some of our findings is very, dedicated to, really, developing a much more holistic form of value creation benefiting, all stakeholders in a mutual way. So those are some of the things we're working on. I'll close out here. I wish you a very good conversation that I believe is to, follow my keynote speech here. I wish I could have been part of it, but I'm looking forward to hear the outcome of what you've been discussing. Thank you very much for listening to me. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you so much, Klaus. We're glad to have your contribution and a share of what it has looked like inside of Mars to bring some of this theory into practice. Lots more to look forward to there. Next up, I'd like to welcome another one of our MBAs for their keynote. And we'll welcome onto our virtual stage here, Herman Galindo. He holds an MBA from Oxford Saïd's Business School. And he is an economist with over 8 years of experience in development work across Latin America and South Asia. He's currently working in IFC and will be discussing how complementary ESG standards and impact-driven measurement tools can help close the pressing development gaps in emerging markets. Welcome, Herman.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Let me start by saying that I would have loved to have this keynote in person, or at least not at 4 in the morning. But I'm grateful for the organizing committee to continue with the forum despite the current circumstances. Today, we have been privileged enough to hear enriching discussions on the new roles of investment and financing services in catalyzing business transformation. We have also touched on the importance of measurement tools and different accounting methodologies to measure impact. In the next couple of minutes, I plan to complement these discussions by sharing some of my experiences working as an operations analyst in Sri Lanka for the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. I will focus on the importance that impact strategies, environmental, social, and governance standards, and measurement systems have in delivering true, provable impact, while at the same time avoiding the dubious greenwashing kind previous panelists have described. To close present development gaps, a dynamic and committed private sector is indispensable, particularly in emerging markets. Job creation, access to quality infrastructure service, financial inclusion, and social general well-being all demand large capital mobilization. Investors willing to provide these resources and seeking both returns and the promotion of real change in these sectors have increased, fortunately, in the last years. However, as we discussed in previous sessions, there is a reasonable concern for the true impact these funds have in moving the development needle. Transparency and systematic change are yet a nice to have for many investors. So how can we complement impact investor appetite for ESG investing to make it a tangible transformation in businesses, particularly in emerging markets? In my experience, to address these concerns, an impact investor should try to go beyond the establishment of ESG standards and demand impact-driven investment strategies from their fund managers and fund administrators. ESG measurement, management, and monitoring provide crucial risk identification, reduction, and mitigation tools. Nonetheless, ESG standards alone are not enough to deliver sizable impact. Projects funded by impact investors require a thorough impact strategy, measurement plan, evaluation processes, and a monitoring system to ensure investments do deliver the expected results. All these may already sound vague and hard to achieve, but in the last decade, considerable improvements have been made in this direction. Take IFC as an example. As a pioneer of assessment and compliance with ESG standards, the corporation recently introduced its own formal anticipated impact measuring monitoring system. The framework builds robust project baselines using various data and research inputs, allowing IFC to objectively assess project level outcomes and examine the systematic effects on the overall market. The system also allows an assessment on how a project affects multi-stakeholders and examine the broader effects on the economy and society, including how projects promote competitiveness, resilience, integration, inclusiveness, and sustainability. Including an impact measurement variable in an investment decision process can result in a trade-off between impact and return. However, it can also yield a multidimensional sustainability measure for business, particularly if it's a multi-stakeholder investing strategy complying with ESG standards. This is precisely the kind of investments IFC developed in Sri Lanka during my 3 years in the field. Let me take some minutes to walk you through over 2 projects I worked on and which I believe serve as an example of adequate examples of impact strategy implementation complemented by ESG standard compliance. Let's start with a traditional financial institution loan. Back in 2017, in urban areas of Sri Lanka, financial inclusion and credit access was common. However, in rural areas, many small and medium enterprises lacked access to credit, thereby being forced to finance their own operations with informal lenders at higher costs. Enhancing rural access to credit was part of IFC's country strategy since 2016. So accordingly, IFC reached out and partnered with Nation Trust Bank, a local Sri Lankan bank, to improve its liquidity position and expand its portfolio and network to rural areas. Catering to rural SMEs proved to be beneficial for both clients and the bank, as the former accessed cheaper formal financing and the latter expanded and diversified its loan book across regions and sectors. The resources IFC provided were earmarked for rural SMEs, guaranteeing impact objectives. In parallel, credit processes in the bank were adjusted to comply with ESG standards, guaranteeing no loan resources would fund environmentally or socially harmful businesses. Thousands of SMEs benefit from fresh access to capital, incentivizing job creation and income improvements in far-off rural areas. Let's move to a more eclectic example of an IFC project. Let me briefly speak about PICMI. As part of the Sri Lanka country strategy, IFC's leadership identified the need to galvanize the economy by supporting non-traditional sectors with both high growth and high impact potential. A nascent but fast-growing entrepreneurship scene was developing. After a thorough market scoping analysis, IFC forayed into the venture capital market by investing in PICMI, a local technology startup, which main product was Sri Lanka's first ride-hailing smartphone app. The project supported the expansion of PICMI outside the capital Colombo and into other business verticals, thereby promoting job creation, financial inclusion for more than 10,000 drivers, and access to affordable, safe, and efficient transportation to more than 1 million users. In addition, the project created a demonstration effect for the local and international investors to fund technology startups in Sri Lanka, a sector previously unrelated to the country. More recently, during the pandemic lockdowns, Picni's business model and the use of technology enabled the company to virtually pivot overnight from a ride-hailing company into a delivery one. In its short story, the company has already proven to be financially viable and socially valuable. All in all, moving the needle requires large capital investment, intricate coordination between various stakeholders, strong institutions, and enabling business environment. Furthermore, impact measurement is expensive and adds an additional layer of complexity to investment decisions. IFC is one of the largest investors in emerging markets, and only until the last couple of years started implemented an anticipated impact measurement and monitoring system. Nevertheless, this proves that some progress has been made in the right direction, and that business opportunities embedded in development challenges still represent an incentive for potential investors to walk that extra mile and make efforts to establish adequate assessment and measurement tools. This would enhance the accountability of the sector and deliver the much needed credibility needed to increase the funds channeled to these problems. Judging from my own experience, achieving the financial and ESG sustainability can go hand in hand, balancing the equation between returns and impact. But it requires investors and key industry players to make three main efforts. One, will and perseverance to search for the right use of funds. It took IFC's investment team more than 2 years to develop the Picnic deal. Between the market scoping and the final fund disbursement, a lot of hard work was done making sure that Picnic was the right startup for IFC to invest its valuable resource. Two, sincerity to assess the true impacts of a project. The impact measurement team questioned hard the positive impacts our deal with Picnic had. This demanded our investment team to provide and develop convincing arguments backed by data around transport access, the demonstration effects on the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and the job creation numbers to defend the deal. Three, the discipline to evaluate and monitor the effect of an investment in society. Client relationships between IFC and Picnic turned out to be almost a daily matter. IFC partnered truly with the client in a way that it allowed to monitor its operation and its impact on society on a daily basis, thereby helping the company and advising it through rough times and helping in the transformation from a ride-hailing company to a true technology company offering various different services. All this was hard work. However, when I sit back home in Colombia and read about the crucial role that Picnic had delivering basic goods in Sri Lanka during stringent lockdowns, I think all that work was worth it. I hope my story brings some confidence to the impact investment community and an example that gradual progress is possible if the right incentives are in place. My personal commitment to you and for the forum assistance is to continue with these efforts and continue with the moral idea that guides the impact investment in those emerging markets. Basically moving the development needle and making life for people in these countries better and more livable. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Herman, for sharing that amazing experience and concrete examples. We are so glad you could be here with us. And thank you to all of the speakers that joined us today for a number of conversations, some very thought-provoking directions that we see this work heading in. And I would like to encourage everyone to join us back in about 20 minutes for our after-hours sessions. We are going to be having 2 different case studies that you can interact and learn more about today. One is with Royal Canin, and the other is with a company called Enel. And we will be sharing a slide here briefly that will give you directions on exactly where you can find that information back on the event homepage. And we also have an opportunity for networking through our partnership with Brella, and an opportunity to connect with other participants who are also in the virtual space and virtual conversations with us. So Please join us back here in about 20 minutes for those sessions. Appreciate your contribution throughout the course of the day. And I will see you again tomorrow for day 3 of the forum. Thanks so much, everyone.